You know that that specific kind of overwhelm you get when you walk into a vitamin shop?
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Or even just scrolling through, the health section online, you just hit a wall.
The wall of tubs.
Exactly. It's just a rows and rows in these glossy plastic tubs, black ones with lightning bolts, really clinical white ones, neon chrome. It's a lot.
A total sensory overload.
Right. And if you actually buy one, say a pre-workout, you crack it open, and what do you see?
Hey, usually a cloud of flavored dust.
A cloud of dust. And there's this little cynical voice in the back of my head that just goes, okay, I just paid $50 for what is essentially sand. They probably just crushed up some vitamins, threw in a bunch of sweetener, and, slapped a label on it.
I think that's the default assumption for a lot of people. It looks simple, so we just assume the process is simple.
Yeah.
But today, we are going to completely dismantle that idea, because that dust is actually the result of some incredibly sophisticated engineering.
So we are diving deep into the world of powder supplement manufacturing. And we're basing this on a really comprehensive guide by Phil Hickson from Superior Supplement Manufacturing.
Right.
And the first thing that just floored me was the money. This is not a niche hobby anymore.
Far from it. As of 2024, the global market for this stuff was valued at nearly $28 billion.
$27.93 billion, to be exact.
And it's projected to grow at, nearly 11% annually through 2030. So we are talking about a massive industrial engine, all of it dedicated to making sure that scoop of powder does exactly what it says it will.
So the mission for this deep dive is to figure out the how. How do they take a bitter metallic tasting vitamin and make it taste like blue raspberry?
And maybe more importantly, how do they stop it from turning into a solid brick of cement in your cupboard?
Exactly.
It is a battle against physics, chemistry, and human biology, really, all at once.
Okay, so let's unpack that. My first question is simply, why? Why powders?
Yeah.
I mean, popping a pill takes 2 seconds. Mixing a drink, it involves a shaker cup, water, the risk of spilling.
Yeah.
It just seems like more of a hassle.
It does on the surface. But then you look at the biology. The first major advantage powder have is bioavailability.
Bioavailability.
Specifically, a concept the industry calls immediate dissolution.
Okay, immediate dissolution. That sounds impressive, but what does that actually mean for my stomach?
Well, think about a tablet. To make a tablet, you have to compress all these ingredients under tons of pressure. It's basically a rock.
Right.
When you swallow it, it just sits in your stomach. Your body has to hydrate it, it has to break down the binders, and physically disintegrate that little rock before the nutrients are even available.
So it's sitting in a queue just waiting to be processed.
Exactly. And if your digestion is a bit slow, or if the tablet is pressed too hard, it might just pass through partially undigested. But with the powder, you're doing the stomach's work before you even drink it. You mix it with liquid, the particles are all dispersed. By the time it hits your system, it's completely primed for absorption.
So it's a speed thing.
It's speed, it's efficiency. Yeah. But honestly, the bigger reason we use powders is it's just practical. It's the horse pill problem.
Oh, I know this one. When the multivitamin's the size of a grape and you have to sort of psych yourself up to swallow it.
We've all been there. But just look at the math. A standard capsule, let's say size 00, can hold maybe 750 milligrams of material. And that's if you really pack it in.
Okay.
Now look at a scoop of protein. That's usually 25 to 30 grams of powder.
Oh, wow. Okay, I see where you're going.
If you wanted to get that same 25 grams of protein from capsules, you would have to swallow, 30 to 40 pills?
In one sitting. That is a horrifying image.
It's physically and economically impossible. You can't compress that much stuff into a tablet that a human would actually be willing to take. So for high-dose thing, protein, fiber, collagen, certain electrolytes powder is really the only delivery system that makes any sense.
It's a volume issue. That makes total sense.
Plus, there's the flexibility. I love this part. If I sell you a bottle of 500 milligram pills, you're locked in. You're taking 500 milligram increments.
You can't take like 1 1/3 pills.
Exactly. You're stuck. But with powder, you have flexible dosing. Maybe you're a smaller person and a full scoop is too much caffeine for you.
You just take half.
You take half. Maybe you're a bodybuilder and you need double the creatine. You take 2 scoops. It puts the control back in your hands.
So we know why we're taking them. Now I want to get into the factory. The guide makes this distinction between straight powders and blended formulations. Straight powders seem, pretty self-explanatory, right?
In theory, yeah. A straight powder is just a single ingredient. Creatine monohydrate is the classic example.
Or just pure vitamin C powder.
Right. The manufacturing focus there is really just purity and potency. You fill the tub, you seal it.
Oh.
Simple.
But the guide implies it gets complicated really fast once you start blending things.
Oh, that's where the real engineering kicks in.
Yeah.
Let's say you're making a modern pre-workout. That's a blended formulation.
Okay.
You're not just putting one thing in the jar. You might have caffeine, beta-alanine, citrulline, flavors, sweeteners, flow agents, maybe 20 different ingredients.
And you just mix them all up, like you're baking a cake.
Heh, if only it were that easy. The huge challenge is homogeneity. You have to guarantee that every single scoop has the exact same ratio of all those ingredients.
Okay, that sounds important.
But here's the catch. These ingredients all have different densities, different particle sizes.
Oh, interesting. So the heavy stuff wants to sink to the bottom.
Exactly. You might have these heavy granular crystals mixed with really light, fluffy herbal powders. If you don't engineer the blending process perfectly, the heavy stuff just sinks.
Which would mean?
It would mean the first 10 scoops you take from that tub are basically just flavor and filler.
And the last scoop at the bottom of the tub
Yeah.
contains a potentially toxic dose of caffeine.
That is a genuinely terrifying thought. So a bad mix isn't just annoying, it's actually dangerous.
It's a serious safety issue. That's why manufacturers use these very specific blending technologies. The guide mentions things like V blenders, which kind of tumble the powder, versus ribbon blenders, which have these blades that physically push the material around. They have to match the machine to the physics of that specific powder to make sure it all locks together.
It really is high-tech cooking. And looking at the categories in the guide, it's not just for gym bros anymore. We're seeing nootropics everywhere.
For the brain powders, yeah. Lion's mane, L-theanine. The challenge there is often cased mushrooms can be pretty earthy and solubility.
And the one that sounds the absolute hardest to me, meal replacements.
That is the heavyweight division of manufacturing, for sure. You aren't just giving someone a little boost. You are trying to sustain a human life.
Right. You need a whole macronutrient profile, proteins, complex carbs, fats balanced with a micronutrient profile of vitamins and minerals, and fats go rancid. Vitamins degrade.
So getting all of that to coexist in a tub for 2 years without spoiling or tasting like cardboard
Is a massive achievement in food science. A huge achievement.
Okay, speaking of things tasting like cardboard, let's talk about texture. Because my biggest problem with powders, and I think this is true for everyone, is the clump.
Ugh, the clumps.
You buy a tub, you open it a month later, and there are just rocks in it.
Or you try to mix it, and you get those disgusting dry bubbles of powder that just explode in your mouth.
Yes, gross. Why does that happen?
It's usually a failure to manage hygroscopicity.
That's a great word, hygroscopicity.
It means the material loves water. It literally pulls moisture right out of the air. A lot of supplement ingredients are naturally hygroscopic. So if you leave them exposed to humidity, even for a bit, they don't just get wet. They bond together. They chemically cement themselves into a rock.
So the brick in my cupboard is basically the powder drinking the humidity in my kitchen.
Precisely. And the solution to that dry bubble problem, where it won't mix with water, is a technology called instantization.
I see that on labels all the time. Instantized BCAA. I always just thought it was marketing jargon.
Nope. It's actually a very cool mechanical process. It usually involves steam treatment and something called agglomeration.
Okay, break that down for me. Agglomeration.
Think about a fine dust, like flour. If you drop a spoonful of flour into a glass of water, what happens?
It just sits on top. It forms a little island.
Right. The surface tension holds it up. The outside gets wet, but the inside stays completely dry. Agglomeration changes the game. They use steam to stick those tiny dust particles together into larger, more porous clusters.
So it's like turning dust into a little sponge.
Exactly. It makes the powder fluffy and porous, so when you drop it in water, the liquid rushes inside the particle structure immediately. It sinks and dissolves. Without that, your protein shake would be a lumpy mess no matter how hard you shook it.
Okay, but there's another term in the guide that seems like the opposite of making things bigger. Micronization.
Yes. Sometimes you need the particle to be absolutely tiny. We're talking under 10 microns.
And why would you want that?
Surface area. If you take a grain of salt and you smash it into 1,000 tiny pieces, the total surface area increases dramatically.
Right.
For ingredients that the body really struggles to absorb, things that aren't very water-soluble, micronization is kind of a cheat code.
So by smashing it into dust, you're giving the stomach more surface area to work with.
Correct. It dissolves faster and more completely. It's crucial for things like creatine. But it's a trade-off. Micronized powders are incredibly dusty. They float in the air at the factory. They coat all the machinery.
And I'm guessing they can be harder to flavor.
Way harder, because they coat your tongue more thoroughly.
Which brings us to the elephant in the room. Flavor, because let's be honest, raw vitamins taste awful. I've tasted pure B complex before. It's memorable. Memorable is a kind word. It's vile. It's metallic. It's bitter. Amino acids often smell like sulfur or rotten eggs. The source material is very blunt about this. It says, quote, straight powders often taste bad.
So how do they hide it? Back in the 90s, they just used a ton of sugar.
Right. But today, we have what I call the clean label paradox.
What's that?
Consumers want the product to taste like a delicious blue raspberry slushie, but they also demand that it has 0 sugar, 0 artificial sweeteners, and no artificial colors.
Make it taste like candy, but make it healthy.
And that is a nightmare for a chemist. Stevia and monk fruit are the go-to natural sweeteners, but they have these weird aftertastes. Stevia can be very licorice-like, so they have to use special masking agents.
But the real high-tech solution the guide mentions is encapsulation. This blew my mind.
It is fascinating. It's basically microscopic wrapping paper. They coat the individual particles of the vitamin or the mineral with a tiny layer of a lipid or a starch.
Like a microscopic M&M shell. That is a perfect analogy. The shell protects the ingredient from oxygen, so it doesn't degrade, but crucially, it keeps the ingredient from touching your taste buds.
So you're drinking the bitter vitamin, but your tongue never even registers it.
Correct. The shell doesn't break open until it hits the acid in your stomach. It is the only way you can make a complex multivitamin powder that doesn't taste like you're licking a handful of pennies.
That is incredibly clever. Okay, we have to talk about the other ingredients section on the label, because this is where people get really suspicious. You see things like silicon dioxide or magnesium stearate, and the internet loves to call these things fillers.
It is a huge point of contention. The industry calls them excipients. And yes, consumers see them as useless sawdust that's just added to bulk up the product and cheat them out of money.
But are they?
No, not at all. Remember that brick problem we talked about?
Yeah, the hygroscopicity.
Silicon dioxide is a flow agent. It coats the particles to keep them sliding past each other. If you remove it, the powder just turns solid. It's not there to fill space. It's there to make the product usable.
So it's functional chemistry.
It's critical.
Yeah.
And here is where it gets really interesting. The guide mentions that you can ask a manufacturer to make a product without these excipients. You can demand a clean label.
And they'll do it.
They will, but they will often require you to sign a hold harmless agreement.
Whoa! Like a liability waiver.
Exactly. Basically, they're saying, we will make this for you, but when your customers complain that the product has clumped into a rock, or when our machines clog up and the dosage becomes inconsistent, you cannot sue us.
That speaks volumes. If the manufacturer is saying, sign this legal document because I know this is going to fail, that really proves these ingredients aren't just fillers.
It proves it completely. It highlights that there's a huge difference between ideology wanting this pure label and the physical reality of chemistry.
Let's shift gears to logistics. We've got the formula. How do we actually make it? The guide talks about sourcing as the first step. Is that just, ordering stuff off a catalog?
It's much more defensive than that. The biggest risk in this industry is adulteration. You order whey protein, but maybe the supplier cut it with something cheaper. So the very first step is identity testing.
You have to prove the white powder is actually what the label says it is.
Before it ever touches a blender, it goes through chemical fingerprinting. You have to prove identity, and you have to prove potency. If your vitamin C is only 50% potent, your entire formula is wrong.
And then safety testing, I assume.
Heavy metal screening is standard now. You have to remember, a lot of these ingredients are concentrated plant extracts. And plants, they just suck up whatever's in the soil.
Right.
So you have to make sure you aren't concentrating lead or arsenic right along with your spinach.
There was one logistical detail in the guide that really surprised me, and it's about expiration dates. I always assumed the expiration date was a hard scientific fact, like, on this day, the product dies.
It is much, much murkier than that. The industry standard is 2 years, but here's the catch. The manufacturer will stamp a date on it, but the brand, the company whose logo is on the tub, is legally responsible for validating that date.
How do they prove it?
Stability testing. You have to put the product in a chamber that mimics aging, high heat, high humidity, and then test it at 6 months, 12 months, 24 months. That's expensive, and it takes. Well, it takes 2 years.
So if you're a new brand, you can't wait 2 years to launch. You'd go out of business.
Exactly. So the loophole is the manufactured on date.
I've seen that. MFG date.
Right. Instead of saying expires in 2028, they just say made in 2026. It shifts the burden. They're telling you when it was born and leaving it up to you to decide when it dies.
That is a fascinating legal dodge. It essentially absolves them of the claim that it's still 100% potent 2 years later, because they never actually made that claim.
It satisfies the requirement for traceability without requiring all that expensive stability data up front. It's very, very common.
So, looking at the scale of this operation, we are not talking about a guy mixing stuff in his garage.
No, we are talking about R&D runs of maybe 10 kilos, scaling all the way up to industrial runs of 20,000 kilos.
20,000 kilos. That's 20 metric tons of powder in a single run.
It really changes your perspective. It's not just grinding up herbs. It's particle engineering, flavor masking, flow agents, and liability management.
It's high-tech food science disguised as a simple tub of powder.
Exactly.
And looking forward, where does this go? The guide mentions personalized nutrition.
That is absolutely the future. Because powder allows for that flexible dosing we talked about, we are seeing the rise of these custom stacks. Companies that analyze your blood work or fitness goals and send you a specific blend just for you.
Which you just can't do with mass-manufactured pills.
That effectively, no. Powder is the medium of customization.
Before we wrap up, I have to ask about one thing the guide mentioned. It was in the FAQ section, and it just stopped me in my tracks.
I have a feeling I know which one.
The source says, and this makes total sense, liquids and oils typically cannot be included in powder products.
Right. Physics. You can't put oil in a dry powder. If you pour oil in a flour, you get dough, not powder.
I have definitely seen MCT oil powder on the shelf. I've seen creamer powders that are made of fat. Are those labels just lying?
No, they aren't lying. But they are performing a kind of magic trick.
Okay, how do you turn a liquid fat into a dry dust?
It involves creating an emulsion, so mixing the oil with water and some kind of carrier, like a starch or a fiber, and then using a process called spray drying.
Spray dry.
Imagine taking that oily water and blasting it through a tiny nozzle into a chamber of very hot air. The droplets are microscopic. The water evaporates instantly in the heat,
Leaving the oil behind.
leaving the oil trapped inside a microscopic shell of that fiber carrier.
So it looks like a powder, it acts like a powder, but microscopically it's actually tiny, tiny balloons of oil.
Exactly. That is how we get powdered butter, powdered cheese, and MCT powder. It's a liquid disguised as a solid.
That is wild. I think I need to sit with that for a second. The idea that my dry powder is actually a liquid in disguise.
It's a good reminder that nothing on that shelf is ever as simple as it looks.
Absolutely. Well, that's our deep dive on the science of the scoop. Next time you're shaking up a drink, spare a thought for the agglomeration and the flow agents making it all possible. Thanks for listening.
Stay curious.